There was a time when the smallest moments quietly held entire families together. No one announced their importance. No one paused to study them. Yet years later, many would look back and realize that what seemed ordinary then had quietly shaped the very meaning of home. Hello, I'm Norman Carter, and this is my channel. Welcome, and thank you for being here. In the gentle light of early evening, a quiet house begins to settle into the rhythm that once defined daily life for countless families. The day has moved slowly toward its end. The last traces of sunlight linger through the kitchen window, falling across a table that has been set with simple plates and glasses. Somewhere in the house, the faint sound of a radio plays softly, its music blending with the steady sounds of preparation. The clink of utensils, the low murmur of conversation, the familiar creak of a wooden floor. Many of us remember evenings like these, though at the time they seemed entirely ordinary. There was no sense that these moments would one day become memories worth preserving. They were simply part of the natural flow of life, unfolding quietly in homes and neighborhoods across towns and cities. Children would return home after long hours outdoors, their shoes carrying traces of dust from sidewalks, fields, or playgrounds. Doors open and close with the casual rhythm of the day, winding down. The air often carried the scent of dinner cooking somewhere nearby, drifting through open windows and across backyards. It was a world structured by small routines, though few people would describe it that way. Meals arrived at roughly the same hour each evening. Families gathered around tables that were rarely elaborate but always meaningful. Conversations were often simple, sometimes quiet, occasionally interrupted by laughter that traveled easily through the house. In those days, many of the things that shaped family life were almost invisible. They were not events marked on calendars or occasions designed for photographs. Instead, they were small habits repeated day after day, forming a kind of quiet structure beneath everyday living. A father placing his hat on the same hook by the door after returning from work. A mother calling everyone to dinner from the kitchen doorway. The steady habit of sitting together, even if only for a short while before the evening continued. At the time, these moments seemed too small to notice. Yet over the years, many people would come to realize that something important had been quietly built inside those routines. Neighborhoods played their part as well. Streets often carried the gentle sounds of children playing until the fading light signaled that it was time to return home. Bicycles rested against fences. A ball might sit forgotten in the grass until the next day. Front porches were places where conversations unfolded without planning. A neighbor might pause while walking by, exchanging a few words that stretched easily into several minutes. No one considered these brief encounters particularly significant, but they formed a subtle web of familiarity that connected one household to another. Life rarely felt rushed in those small intervals between the end of the workday and the quiet of night. In fact, many of the things that held families together during those years had very little to do with grand occasions or dramatic moments. They were built instead on repetition, on the quiet predictability of everyday life. And perhaps that is why their importance was not immediately understood. A shared meal might last only 20 minutes, yet the habit of gathering created a rhythm that children grew up expecting. Evening walks through the neighborhood might cover only a few blocks, yet those slow steps offered space for conversations that did not need to be hurried. Sometimes the most powerful influences in family life arrived not through instruction, but through observation. Children watched how adults spoke to one another. They noticed how disagreements were handled at the table, how laughter softened the edges of long days, how ordinary problems were discussed and eventually resolved. Rarely did anyone pause to explain these lessons. They were simply absorbed, quietly and naturally, through the daily act of living together. Over time, these small patterns became deeply familiar. The same chairs at the dinner table, the same paths walked through the neighborhood, the same quiet rituals that marked the passage of weekdays and weekends. At the time, no one imagined that such simple details would one day stand out so clearly in memory. But memory has a curious way of selecting what mattered most. Years later, people often recall not the large milestones, but the small textures of daily life. The sound of dishes being washed after dinner, the gentle hum of a television in the background, the way the house felt when everyone was finally home for the evening. These were the unnoticed threads that held family life together. Yet something interesting happens when we look back across the decades. What once seemed like routine now appears almost carefully constructed, though no one planned it that way. The routines of family life created a quiet structure that guided how people connected with one another. Time was not always abundant, but it was shared in ways that rarely felt forced. And perhaps it is why so many of those moments remain vivid long after the years themselves have passed. It was never just about the dinner table or the front porch or the evening walk. Those were only the visible parts. The deeper story, the one many people only begin to recognize later, lies in the countless small gestures that filled the spaces between them. At the time, they seemed too ordinary to matter. Only later did many begin to understand how much they had quietly held together. And the more closely we look at those simple habits of everyday life, the more an interesting question begins to emerge. Not a dramatic question, but a quiet one. In many homes, the day followed a rhythm that required very little explanation. Mornings carried their own pace. Afternoons unfolded through work and school, and by evening the household gradually gathered itself again. It was not always a perfectly calm process. There were tired voices, unfinished tasks, and the ordinary pressures that accompany daily life. Yet beneath those small challenges, something steady was quietly taking shape. Many of us remember the particular feeling of a house becoming whole again at the end of the day. A door opening, footsteps moving through the hallway, the subtle change in atmosphere that occurred when everyone had finally returned home. It was not announced, but it was felt. The kitchen often became the center of this quiet reunion. In countless households across different cities and towns, dinner was prepared in modest spaces where conversation mixed naturally with the work of cooking. The light above the stove might cast a warm glow over the room, illuminating steam rising from a pot or the simple motion of someone setting plates on the table. In those days, many families did not see these moments as particularly meaningful. They were simply necessary parts of living together. Yet repetition has a powerful way of shaping memory. When the same small actions occur day after day, they slowly become part of the emotional architecture of a household. A chair pulled out at the same place at the table. A familiar phrase spoken before a meal begins. The gentle pause as everyone settles into their seats. None of these gestures seemed remarkable, but they create a pattern. And patterns, over time, create belonging. It is interesting to consider how little formal effort was required to build that sense of connection. Families rarely organize special activities in order to spend quality time together. A phrase that would only become common much later. Instead, time together happened naturally because life itself required shared routines. There were dishes to wash, stories from the day to tell, homework to be finished at the table while adults read newspapers or spoke quietly about small matters. Even silence had its place. A child might sit nearby drawing or turning the pages of a book while the radio murmured in the background. No one felt compelled to fill every moment with activity. The simple act of being present in the same space often seemed enough. Looking back, it becomes clear that these quiet hours served as a kind of invisible framework for family life. They were not designed to teach lessons, yet lessons emerged all the same. Children observed how patience worked. They noticed how adults spoke during moments of disagreement. They saw how humor could soften tension, and how small acts of kindness appeared in the middle of ordinary evenings. At the time, no one described these as values being passed from one generation to another. They were simply the natural expressions of living together. Outside the home, the neighborhood extended the sense of quiet familiarity. Streets often carried the soft sounds of daily life well into the early evening. Someone might water a small garden while a neighbor returned from the grocery store. A screen door might close with its distinctive echo. These details rarely attracted attention, yet they created an environment where life felt shared, even among people who were not closely related. In many places during the middle decades of the 20th century, neighborhoods functioned almost like extended living rooms. Front yards blended into sidewalks. Conversations drifted easily from one house to the next. Children moved freely between homes, often guided only by the fading light of the day. When the sun began to sink lower in the sky, parents would call out from porches or kitchen windows, their voices traveling across yards and streets. The message was simple and familiar. It was time to come home. At the time, few people paused to consider how these small patterns influenced the emotional landscape of family life. They simply felt natural. Yet years later, many would begin to notice how powerful those ordinary structures had been. The regularity of shared meals, for example, created predictable moments when everyone could reconnect. Even if the conversation was brief or unremarkable, the habit itself carried meaning. It reminded each member of the household that they were part of something stable. In a similar way, everyday responsibilities quietly reinforce a sense of cooperation. Children helped set tables or clear dishes, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes without complaint. Adults balanced work and home responsibilities without much ceremony. No one spoke of these tasks as opportunities for bonding, yet they often served exactly that purpose. Something important was happening within these repeated acts of ordinary life. They created continuity, and continuity, though rarely discussed, forms the foundation of many lasting memories. Over time, the rhythm of shared routines allowed family members to understand one another in subtle ways. People learned the small habits that defined those they lived with, the way someone stirred their tea, the quiet moment when a father folded the evening newspaper, the predictable laughter that followed a familiar story. These details accumulated slowly. At first, they seemed almost invisible, but as years passed, they became deeply woven into the memory of home. It is perhaps only later in life that many people begin to notice how those small, repeated gestures carried an unexpected weight. They shaped not only daily schedules, but emotional connections as well. A house filled with ordinary routines gradually became something more than a physical structure. It became a place where time gathered, a place where generations quietly learned how to live alongside one another. And when we look back now, across the long passage of years, it is striking how rarely those moments were recognized while they were happening. The conversations were simple. The rooms were modest. The evenings often passed without any dramatic event. Yet something meaningful was unfolding within those quiet hours. The small things, repeated day after day, were holding families together in ways that few people fully understood at the time. Perhaps that is why the memories of those moments remain so vivid even decades later. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were shared. And somewhere within those ordinary evenings, beneath the gentle rhythm of daily life, time was quietly weaving something that would last far longer than anyone expected.